Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to study about JWT token. What we are going to see is that how the simple authentication or authorization mechanism without JWT token would work and how much problem you will have scaling such system compared to the JWT based system. So in the JWT token based systems, you will not have to make some external calls and you will have a better scalable system. So that's the idea today, where I'm going to start with the basic authentication or the simplest authentication mechanism, where we'll see how easy it is to implement the simplest authentication mechanism. Yet there are multiple challenges when it comes to scale. But when we take an example of JWT tokens, it will be very easy to scale and handle the authorization as well. So let's quickly get started. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this channel, I post videos related to software engineering, which helps the software engineers being a better dev. So today I'm going to talk about authorization and authentication, and I'm going to talk about the systems which existed in the past and how the authorization systems are being used today. So when I started my career in back in 2014-15 or so, in those days, the JWT tokens or the tokens which are being used today are not common, were not common, but today they are very much common. So I'll start with the simplest implementation which was used in the past, and even today many e-commerce companies still use it, and then I'll compare it with the token JWT token based approach so that we can compare and see what are the advantages. So that's the overall idea. I'm going to talk both about authentication and authorization. The simple definition for authentication is that you are able to tell that are you able to log in or not. So basically who I am, that's what the authentication tells. And authorizations is related to what are the operations you are allowed for. So for example, if you are an admin, you might be allowed to have some more actions, but if you are a customer, you might not be allowed for some of the actions. So authorizations help you to decide whether a particular API is allowed for you or not, and authentication is to claim that if I am Anubhav, I'll be able to verify that yeah, I am actually Anubhav. So these are the two things which are important, and when you build systems, both the things are important, even though the definitions are little bit here and there. But when we talk about the systems in production, both the things generally come into the play. So what I'll do is that let's first talk about the approach which used to exist in the past, and then we'll see how things evolved overall. So the things which existed in the past was simple token based authentication. So it was only related to authentication, it was not the authorization based mechanism, and you had to manually implement the authorization. So it was it you can call it as a bearer token, where whenever you log into the server you get a token, and then using that token you make further calls, and the backend will verify whether this token is valid or not. And that's how the system used to work. And let me just talk a bit about a few things, the overall architecture, so that you understand it better. So this is how the flow was, that you have an authentication flow in which you enter a login, that is username and password, that will go to the backend service, whatever backend service you have, and then you will verify the credential. So the credential information will be stored in the database in the form of username, hashed password, and the salt. So these you can read about salt and hashed password and all those things, but in this video I'm not going to focus on that. The idea is that you verify the credentials from the database, and once you verify the credential, you generate some random GUID, and you can call it as a session ID. And then you put that session ID in the database or your cache or Redis, whatever. And then you return the session ID as a success to the user. So this is how the authentication used to work, that now I have been able to successfully log in. It's very simple to do that. You have a database, you do the login verification, you put the session ID in the cache, that yeah, this session ID belongs to which user. You might also put what type of user this person is, like the person might be an admin, might be user, might be something else. So you put those things in your cache, and then when the actual API call is made, whenever the actual API call is made, again the request will go to the backend service. And then instead of what it will do is that instead of verifying itself, it has to verify the session by making an external call. So whatever session ID it gets from the front end, that is from the user, it will make the Redis call or the external storage call with a session ID, and then get the valid user ID or user role. So if the user role or user ID exists in the database, that means that this is a valid request, and in that case the request will proceed further. It will also verify if the user role is among the list allowed role. So for example, let's say a user has called the delete API, and delete API is not allowed by the regular user, it is only allowed by admin. So those things will be hard coded in your backend service. It might be in a config file or somewhere, and you will verify in memory, and then you will actually make the backend call. And if that backend call is not allowed, then you will return the response with 403 or permission denied or whatever. So this is how the things will work. And this is very simple to implement, that you just have an external storage and you put the session details, and then authorization you manage on your own, and things would work fine. And trust me, the simple architecture and the similar architecture I have seen in multiple places in the past, and this just works fine. However, there is this one challenge, that for each API request, whenever a API request is made, you have to make an external call. So this external call is an overhead for you. So whenever a request comes, you have to make the external call to verify that whether this particular credential is or the session ID is correct or not, and then you decide whether to proceed further or not. So this one external call is necessary here, because your backend service cannot store just everything. And also this works fine with the limited number of user roles. Let's say you have few user role like admin or user, or maybe the payment admin, and you can define the bunch of roles, that what are the roles allowed for what are the APIs. So those things can be configured somewhere in the constant file, and you will be good to go. So it works fine in e-commerce platforms which do not have many of the roles, and the latency is not much of a drawback. So even here, the latency will not be much of a challenge if you store these data in the Redis. Redis is anyway very fast, so one external call is made. But yeah, scaling things is a challenge, because now you have one single storage and all the backend services, not just one. Tens of hundreds of backend services will keep on making call to this storage, so that can be the problem. So that was the simple authentication mechanism which used to exist in the past. So that's the simple authentication based mechanism, and it works well with the limited number of scopes and allowed categories, because it's simpler to handle, and in the limited scope it works fine. The accelerator link I'll paste in the description, but it is the same which we just now talked about. Now you see the problem here, right? That for each API call you have to make the external call, which was not so good. So what's the solution to it? What if whenever a call is made, I am able to verify the user roles in the in memory itself? What if I don't have to make any external call? What if the request which comes to me already contains the user role? So that's what is JWT token all about. So I'll go to the definition later, but before that, let me just give you some idea about the JWT token, and then only we can talk about it further. So what if? So the login process is again the same authentication flow, that you make a request, you verify the credential, and then when you verify the credential, you return the token. But here you are not storing those tokens anywhere. So you don't have any Redis or anything here. And whenever the authorization flow comes, you make a request, and in the request itself, so first of all, JWT token, this token will contain that what are the operations you are allowed for. Are you allowed for read operation? Are you allowed for write operation? What kind of things you can do? All those things will be configured in the JWT token, and this will be sent to the user, the customer. And whenever the customer makes the API call, that customer will also send the information that, hey, I am admin, I am user, I am payment admin, and all those things will be sent in the request itself. And then the backend service will verify if the call is needed or not, or it's allowed to proceed further or not, and then it will make the call. So no external call is needed. Now, I am sure that you might have figured out an issue with this particular approach, that what if you can't trust the user, right? So it might be possible that you return the response, that in the JWT token you might return that, hey, you are a user, but the request gets changed. So those things are taken care by the JWT token, and that's what we are going to talk today. So let's talk a little bit about JWT token, and then I'll show you with the help of code And not just with the help of code, I'll show you with the help of Azure, or the practical example of how these tokens actually work and how this is being used in the production. So what is JWT token? It's an encrypted token sent to the client, which also contains the authorization information. So it's an encrypted token. That's the important keyword. So the client will not be able to change it. So if the client changes it, and then if the client sends the changed token to the server will come to know. So that's the important thing, that the encrypted token, and actually it is signed as well, so nobody can actually change it, and contains a list of roles in the token itself. So the token itself contains all the information, and it can only be decrypted by the server using a secret which is there only in the server. So there would be a secret using which you will encrypt the token, and there can be the same secret or a different secret based on various approaches, and only the server will be able to decrypt it. So that's the important part, who exactly is able to decrypt it. And the token expiry can also be set, that hey, till what time the token is valid. So hold your thoughts, all your thoughts here. Let me do one thing, that I'll go to Azure portal and show you how things look like. So I have this Azure, Graph Explorer or whatever with me. Let me close it. And actually what I wanted to show you is that to set up auth, I'm taking the example of OpenAuth, but it will hold true overall. And I'll have a separate series on OpenAuth in future. But here, what I wanted to show you is that I can create some JWT token using the client ID and secret. So basically, whenever you have a JWT token, I can create some client ID, some client secret here. I have a client secret and client ID here, and I'll go to this Postman to create the token. So to create the token, what we have is this API. We can call the API of Microsoft, login.microsoft slash. These are the basic steps you don't need to care about in this particular video. And you just call this endpoint with all the information about client secret and all those things. And you can get the JWT token in the response. Now this token, although it looks not very interesting, what exactly it is, it's pretty much confusing. But if you go to the jwt.io, that's the JWT website, and you put the token here, you will find bunch of information, that what's the audience, what's the role. So this particular API is allowed to make the group.read call. So this is the call which I'm allowed to make. And it says invalid signature because this particular website does not have the signature of this one. And I'll come to that. But and this particular token is valid till a particular epoch time which is mentioned here. So all those things are there. Basically, this JWT token consists of three parts: header, which contains some of the information about the encryption algorithm; that payload, that is the data, and this is the data which is there, which will be used by the backend service; and the third is signature. So this is the signature. Now here it's showing invalid signature, but for the backend system, whoever has generated this token, they will be able to say that yeah, this particular token is valid. Now I can use this token, I can copy this token and then make some API calls to get the data. So basically I can go here in my request header, I can pass the token and I can make the call, whatever slash groups, because it said that I'm allowed to make the groups.read call. So I'll be able to make that call to get the data. And what will happen here is that it is valid till a particular time. So the valid time here is mentioned as 3599 seconds, which is exactly 1 hour. For this token will be valid for 1 hour, and for 1 hour I'll be fine. So after 1 hour I have to refresh the token. So there are approaches, there are APIs to refresh the token. I'll not again talk about that. I want to talk about the gist of it, that you are making the call using this access token, and the backend service does not need to talk to the auth service directly. So what happens here, let me just go to the diagram. So what is happening here is that whatever JWT token you have, you make the request to the backend service, and backend service does not have to make call to the centralized authentication mechanism for one each API, right? So instead of you making the call to the authentication system for each API, which you were doing earlier in the previous approach, that hey, for each API you are making the call to the centralized system, and what it will do is that it will just slow down everything. because it can even bring that down. What you are doing is that you are making the call once in an hour. So what happens here is, in the new approach, is that the same API will be able to verify the all the accesses and proceed further. And whenever the token expires, then only you make the call to the credential information system to refresh the token. So the number of API calls might reduce from hundreds and thousands per hour to just one call per hour. And you can, based on the severity, if your system is little bit okay, then it's fine to have a validity of an hour. But if it is very strict, then you can have a validity of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, very less duration of validity. So till that time, this particular token will be valid, and the backend service will keep on calling the external, the dependent APIs. So yeah, this is how the things will work. And I also wanted to show you the basic token based authentication, how it looks like in the code. But again, don't go by the code much. It's a Java based code, not much here, but definitely it will give you the sense of how things work. So here you will have some secret in the backend, and this particular secret will be available to you, only to you. It will not be available to anyone else. So it will be there in the environment variable, or something like that. So nobody else would have this data. So what you do is that whenever a request comes to generate the JWT token, you make some code, write some code to do that, and basically you actually generate the JWT token. And whenever a request comes back to you, so you decrypt using the same key, using the key with which you have generated the token. Using the same key, you can decrypt the token. So this is how the things would work, that whenever you give a response, give a response with a token, and you can decrypt it with the same key. In fact, there are other approaches as well, like asymmetric key decryption and encryption. I'm not going to talk again about it, but the thing is, if you have this secret safe with you and nobody knows about this secret, then you will be mostly fine. So let's run it, and I just want to show you a bit about it, and yeah, then we'll close this video. So let's just run it. So basically we are generating the JWT token here, and what I'll do is that it is just setting up a bunch of things: issued at, expiry time, sign with the key, like the random key which we saw. And then it takes some time and generates this very long JWT token. So you can copy this token and you can send this to the front end. Now whenever a request comes back to you from the front end to the back end, you can call this parse JWT token. And in the parse JWT token, what will happen is that it will parse with the same key, because here I'm using a symmetric encryption and decryption. So if you parse with the same key, you will get the data. So basically you get all the data, like name, email, etc. So this will help you to not even make some external calls. If all the backend systems have this key, then they can just decrypt the data, and they can scale their backend systems overall. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope that this particular video clarified why exactly JWT token is needed and how exactly it is very much helpful. So just to summarize, that in the regular authentication authorization system, you had to make the external calls for all the APIs. And although it is fine to make calls, but if your company is working at a very high scale, it just gets tough to scale it for each API call you making call to this system. So instead of that, why not just call this authentication system, or identity system, once in an hour or once in 30 minutes or so, and till 30 minutes just work with the same token, and this backend service will verify by itself and proceed further. So why not just use this approach and not the other one? So it just works. And based on the severity of the API, if the API is very much sacred, then you might want to call the external source always. But if it is a simpler API, why would you want to call the external service all the time? So in that way, you can tweak the amount of time you want to call the external service. And also you can deal with the various authorization mechanism. As you saw earlier, that the JWT token contains the information of what are the authorization and what are the external API calls you are allowed to make or not. So all those things also can be encrypted in the JWT token. So lots of information are already stored in the JWT token. You don't have to do much. So that's how the things work. So I hope this video was very much helpful. What I'll do is that I'm planning to create a series on authentication and authorization system. I'll do that in a few months, maybe in a month. But I hope this video helped you to clarify how this particular approach helps scaling your authorization and authentication system. So yeah, that's it from my side for this video. I hope this video was helpful. Please like and comment if you really like it. It really makes a difference. Till the next time, bye.